Hello, and welcome to the Based on Balls podcast. I'm your host, Connor Brinkman, the GM of the Sod Poodles, and this will be the second episode where I am recording solo. A lot of teammates are busy. Congratulations to Paul again for having child number two. And while we are disappointed that we could have fewer GMs pop on, and we'd love to hear different opinions, that the bright side is this will be a quicker episode. So the agenda for this podcast will be that we are first going to go over the matchups. We had two very key ones, and then I'm going to breeze through some of the ones that didn't have as big of an implication off playoff standing or the scores weren't closer. We are going to go over three trades for titles. We're going to go over next week's matchup and then a quick overview of the updated playoff picture since we did have some high flying action this week. And why not start now? And for context, before I get into it, we currently have 17 games in the book. Next Sunday is the trade deadline, so this is the last full week that teams can decide what direction they want to take. The first matchup that we have to go over is Hen Clearwater Beach Dogs beating Cody's Bowling Green Hot Rods by 1 point. 1 point. 703 to 702. In general, this was a lower scoring week across the league. If there is not a no-hitter, I do not think a single team would have scored above 725, 750. So 7-3 to 702 was close to the class of the league. For this matchup, there are a lot of things that can be discussed. Hen showed terrific balance, 356 hitting points and 347 pitching points. Jose Ramirez in a 100-point week. From being in the title game last year to being the 5 or 6 seed a lot of the time, I think Hen has fallen a little bit in my eyes, but the last 2 or 3 weeks, the Beach Dogs have really shown some resilience and been terrific. And then for Cody, I mean, this was a fluke. You can overanalyze certain managerial decisions that could have gotten him the win. But the thing that would scare me for the Hot Rods is 274 pitching points. As long as I've been a GM in a Cody league, and especially the Johnny Lee Memorial League, pitching has always been the strength. It's been a top 2 or 3 team. So 274 points when we consider 300 kind of the min for being a consistent playoff pitching total, it's just not going to do it. Logan Gilbert had 15 points total. Mitch Keller only threw 4 innings, and there were a couple mediocre non-hot rod standard starts in between. Hunter Green and Jack Flaherty with his new team shoved. We'll get to that trade later, but I think there's some questions of what Cody will want to add at the deadline versus waiting for certain pitchers like Max Scherzer and Mason Miller to get healthier. The second key matchup for determining playoff purposes, and I think the second closest matchup in the league, truly was Tita's Nashville Sound defeating Chad's OKC 89ers 621 to 578. This might have decided the last playoff team. Right now, Tita has a game over Chad and the tiebreaker with 3 full weeks to go. There are a couple teams that are not named Tita in the playoff picture, but he is the clear favorite. For Chad, this again just points to a disastrous performance. This might be the worst pitching performance of a week that any competitive team has had. Kyle Harrison and Clayton Kershaw had negative starts. There were maybe a couple positives, but there are just so many negative starts or duds that outweigh it, and I don't want to bog everyone by going into them. The one positive for Chad is 392 offensive points. Anthony Santander had 80. Luis Garcia had 61. He's done a great job of finding these folks for cheap and just putting up value for him. And Tita just had the better pitching in this matchup. Spencer Schwellenbach, the last 5 starts, has caught straight fire. Jose Siriano has 29 points. Charlie Morton and Joey, at least my boy, have scored 30 points each this week. So I think Tita just had a better overall performance. And while I do see a scenario where Chad could buy and still try to make the playoffs, he has kind of declared himself a seller, sold off a small piece or two already. So I think this is just a massive win for Tita. And while the job fully isn't done, he's put himself in a great spot. The third matchup, then this is certainly the drop off for playoff spots and what matters. But I beat Dave, 619 to 512. This matchup meant a lot to me because he and I think, are two of the rebuilding teams that have developed in different ways. Dave has bought and shown 700-point weeks consistently. He's had some crazy upsets. My ceiling is not there, but I've just accumulated a number of assets where I'm confident I can turn those around and get to that 7, 8 seed level sooner than hopefully the league thinks. So Dave is an awesome competitor, and I was really glad for this matchup. The pitching points are kind of identical, but my team outslugged him 409 to 308. The standouts for Dave's teams, Griffin Jack had 28 points in 3 outings. Bailey Ober had a 39-point start against the White Sox. I am living in Minneapolis and saw two of the White Sox games, and Bailey Ober might be my trade of the year. He was acquired from Tita for Austin Wells and some other dude, and Bailey Ober might be a top 10, 15 pitcher. So I think that the value Dave's gotten out of him is crazy, quality start after quality start, and he will be a big piece of the Red Wings in 2025. The only offensive standout for Dave's team, in my opinion, was Jake Berger with 63 points. And then I just had a bunch of dudes in the low 50s, bunch of 20s and 30s. William Abreu had 47 points in 12 at bats. That is literally averaging an RBI single every at bat. Austin Gomber and Paul Blackburn are 30-point starts. Curious if I can move them at the deadline or if I just keep them for next year. The other four matchups are less close, or let's go over them pretty quickly. John Haidt beat Smell 694 to 442. Haidt standout players were Manny Machado with 69 points, Aaron Judge with 80. I do want to raise another concern. The 251 pitching points is not what you're going to want to see in the playoffs, and Haidt has since made a move to address his pitching, but that might be something to look out for. Smell standout was Pete Crow Armstrong, 41 points. I've always liked watching him at AAA or him roaming the outfield. Hopefully he gets the hitting together. Jab beat Bracton 699 to 562. The Portland Sea Dogs had an 103-point outing from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and 486 points total. Crazy offensive outputs from said Sea Dogs is nothing to be surprising. And I think this means a lot for Bracton. He's low-key over the last week bought it some really solid, maybe for a truly competitive team, depth pieces, but where his team is now, Colton Cowser with 70 points. That's been a terrific find that I traded him for Mason Wynn. Anthony Volpe with 78, and the pitching of 235 points. That's a good number, and that would have been competitive with a couple of the contenders. DJ Hers, Kyle Freeland, Ryan Nelson. Who knows how long they're going to stay in their rotations, but they're pretty hot now. The Tides, Paul beat Scott 841 to 486. The Paul standout, Blake Snell had a no-hitter. That's why Paul is clearly the top scorer. And Scott's standout is Royce Lewis, 50 points and 20 at-bats. Stay healthy, my king, or trade him to me, please. And the final matchup, the Rocky Mountain Vibes, Fry beat Homco's Trash Pandas 625 to 508. 625 is probably not what Bry wants to see, but realistically, scoring was low across the board. Rafael Devers had 72 points, Vinny P with 87. That carries an offense pretty well. Homco's new addition, Tyler Glass, now got 30 points, but I didn't think there were too many standouts other than that. So those are our week 17 matchups. There is one trade that I want to specify. When I run the show alone, my moniker for this is going to be three trades for titles, but most of the deals made were kind of value adjustments between Braxton, myself, and Paul. And the three of Braxton and I are likely not making the playoffs. And Paul, I think, has kind of declared that he doesn't think that he is going to win it all. So for most of the moves that we made, I don't know if it warrants like it pushing a playoff. Maybe we'll get into it more in the off season or how teams are looking later. The deal that I think we need to go over is Paul acquiring Luis Robert, and Andy Pajes, and Cody Gain, Jack Flaherty, and Brandon Nimmo. I absolutely love this deal. For Paul, if he doesn't think he's going to win now, getting a five-tool proven outfielder in Luis Robert and Andy Pajes is an excellent move. And for Cody, who thinks his window is to win now, Jack Flaherty is the piece to do that. And it's not like Brandon Nimmo's a slouch. Nimmo is not one of the biggest names, but he certainly provides value to any fantasy team. A few weeks ago, there was a trade that was essentially Garrett Crochet for Julio Rodriguez. And I think Paul absolutely killed that, getting a long-term fantasy asset for a starting pitcher who would be electric now, but who knows what the future holds. This is a similar vein to me. Robert being a better long-term piece, but Flaherty helping to win a championship. But I do think that with the addition of Nimmo, this is definitely more fair or even. And Pajes might grow. Maybe he pulls a James Outman and is tough next year. But Paul gets his long-term value. Cody gets his win now piece without sacrificing a crazy amount of his future. Absolutely love this deal. Looking ahead, Bry and John Haidt are going to be playing in Week 18. That should be cinema, I think, is the term that John used. The last I checked, let me pull up a fresh score. The Vibes are currently losing to the Argos by 74-69. John Haidt has used one start, Zach Gallen for 9 points, but I still think that Haidt pulls this out. I saw Garrett Crochet Saturday, electric arm, but I just keep coming back to the fact that Bry traded a top 10 fantasy asset for a pitcher who is on an inning limit. I just think that is a lot of value to lose when you are facing a top 3 or 4 team. So admittedly, my confidence in the Vibes has gone down. So I still think I take Haidt here, but it's going to be close. I could see this within 30 points or another matchup like Cody's and Hens where we are on Sunday Night Baseball and all watching and off for what will happen. Right now, Chad is currently beating Hen 101-65, and that's what I have as my number 2 matchup. I'm going to lean Hen here, and 2 or 3 weeks ago, I would have been way more excited about this matchup. Hen on a warpath to prove himself, and Chad going for the playoff. Chad has now lost to PETA and declared a likely seller, sold off his closer Kirby Yates today. I just think Hen has more drive to add if necessary. And neither team has used a start. So right now it's 35 points on day 1, but there's plenty of time for the Beach Dogs to come back from that. Right now, Paul is beating Jab 59-38, but this is the exact same scenario for me. Paul has said publicly, I don't think that I'm going to win it this year. And personally, for me, that's kind of a disappointment because Paul had an insane top 3 team run for a good 5 or 6 weeks. And for the after the first four seeds, I thought his team would have the best chance of doing some damage in the playoffs. He beat Cody last year, for goodness sake. So I just think Paul's going to continue to make value moves. And if Jab thinks that beating Paul is going to strengthen his case for a top seed in these playoffs, the moves are going to be made. So sorry to sound like a broken record, but I think the team that has clearly indicated they are looking for a better spot for a long-term run is long-term as in the rest of the playoff is going to win this. So I've got to hand it to Jab. Right now, I am playing Bracton. I'm going to win this. I am up by 40 points with one extra start used. Pitching looked okay so far. And um, weird fact, I have not mathematically been eliminated from the playoffs to my knowledge. I am 3 games back with 3 games to go. So I might be selectively buying and could pull out this win. If Tita beats Smell, which is the other matchup, my buying days are probably over. But I think I'm going to beat Bracton. But regrettably, I think Tita is going to beat Smell because Tita's team is on a mission to hold down that playoff spot. Right now, I am beating Bracton 107-63, and Tita is losing to Smell 20-26 with no starts used in that matchup. Cody's playing Scott. Cody is going to beat Scott. I'm not going to say all my sentences like a children's book, but that's pretty straightforward. And finally, Humko is beating Dave by 6 points, 98-92. I've got this going to Dave. His team's just shown so many hot moments that I think he's going to really put on a show, especially after a tough loss to me. And this has just been a rough year for Homco. We thought the then Cannonballers would be a fringe playoff team, and right now that is just not happening. The last thing I like to discuss is the playoff picture. Cody's loss has massive ramifications because there are now four teams that have a record of 14-3. The team that gets a bye or the team that has to play another competitive, rough matchup potentially is very much up in the air. Right now, I believe that Height has the scoring advantage, but Cody has the winning tiebreaker. So the Hot Rods, the Sea Dogs, the Yard Goats, and the Rocky Mountain Vibes are all 14-3. They could be anywhere from 1-4, and I don't think anyone is going to upset them. Hen is currently 3 games back and clearly the 5 seed. I don't think that one of those top 4 teams goes 0-3 and he goes 3-0, but Hen is very clearly going towards the 5. And right now, Paul is in a very comfortable position for the 6 seed. The 7 seed, there are 3 teams mathematically in it, to my knowledge. Tita is very clearly the favorite at 9-8. Chad is 8-9, and I'm 6-11. I'm probably not making it, and since Chad has declared himself a seller, I think that Tita is going to handle it, especially if he beats Mel or I make my matchup competitive versus Chad next week. But I think the 7 seed might be the only one besides the top 4 playoff team that is going to have intrigue. And there's 1 week before the trade deadline. There is a lot of different moves that could be made. I think some teams have been very passive in going in about it. A lot of players were acquired proactively. So how much roster space do each team want to continue using up to add spots, or are they comfortable and laying it right? I hope I can sell some pieces off for my fellow GMs that haven't been having the hottest year. Hopefully, there are some fireworks. Am I personally confident? No. But for some closing thoughts, even if we can't come back to you, our faithful listeners, next week and say that there is an explosive trade deadline. There is so much activity going on in this league. We have 4 teams jousting for number one. There are teams still in the playoff. There are upsets that could be had. I know I made some boring predictions, but would it be a surprise to see Smell pull out a perfect game against Hita again? For Pomko to show what we thought his team was capable of against Dave, for Braxton to eclipse the 600-point mark. These It's baseball. Anything can happen, and I know I cannot wait to see it. And I hope you will join me in watching it as these final 3 weeks of the regular season and the playoffs start. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all have a